in preparation for the CCATT Conference and Board of Trustees Institute, which was scheduled for June. Now that event is now scheduled for September, we will be having 2 more events, which I know Cynthia, Dr. Farrell will be sharing more information about shortly, and we'll be providing more information as that is confirmed. But do know that we are planning some additional events in the summer, in June and August, to again prepare everybody for an excellent in-person event that we'll be hosting here in Austin, September 16th through the 18th. So we look forward to seeing you all there, hopefully in person, but we do we will be preparing a virtual option for those who would prefer joining virtually. Before I get started with this event or this conversation, I do want to recognize and thank my partners and colleagues at the Texas Success Center. So, Dr. Farrell, Dr. Ellis, Sway, Ellie Rodriguez, all of these folks are instrumental in putting together excellent events, putting together wonderful content and professional development opportunities for our trustees and regents. And so on behalf of the trustees and regents across the state, I want to express my thanks for all the direct communication, behind the scenes work, and everything in between. And so thank you all for everything that you do. I know that we are a better association and a better community for the support that you all provide. And so with that, I would gladly hand it off to Dr. Farrell to help kick off this conversation. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gonzalez. I really appreciate it and the good partnership that we have. So this is new to us, right? To partner together to bring services to all the trustees. So thank you, Manny, for that. And thank you to Carol Scott, the chair of your board. You've been great partners to work with. So I want to just kick off this conversation about monitoring what matters by saying a little bit about the center, who we are and what we're about. So that for those of you, if there's any trustees on the line who are a new trustee or you're new to the Texas Success Center support, give you a little context of where we're headed with this Monitoring What Matters webinar. So prior to the center coming to TAC, we had a lot of student success initiatives going on in the state. And Ellie, you can go ahead and move the slide for me, please. And so about 5 years ago, we established the Texas Success Center. And like TAC, we are dedicated to social and economic mobility. But the way that we do that, so TAC does it through policy and advocacy, but the Success Center does that by coming alongside the community colleges and supporting your student success efforts. And we do that in 4 ways. So we support your leadership team, so your CEOs and your CAOs and your pathways leads and your faculty leads form teams together, and they come to events, institutes, twice a year. And at those institutes, you also have coaches. And so we have year-round support around our strategy that we call Texas Pathways through institutes and coaching. We also have regional meetings that we come to you and help support your teams to implement and scale the essential practices of the model. We also have an arm that we call knowledge development, which is it's a research arm of our work where we learn about what you're doing so we can help share the good news of what your colleges are doing with the other colleges. And then lastly, the other way that we help support the college's student success efforts is through the Board of Trustees Institute. And so it's a full array of folks at your colleges that are doing good work, and we're trying to spread that support across from trustees to leadership team to faculty to support teams so that you have a college-wide institutional transformation reform effort going on. So one thing I want to say about the BOTI, it started in 2007, and it had a portion of the colleges that were included. But recently, we have opened it up that all 50 community colleges are invited to the Board of Trustees Institute. Now, everything that the center does is 100% funded by philanthropy. And so all the services that come to you come absolutely free. And so the Board of Trustees Institute and the CCATT Summer Conference that Manny was talking about earlier in September is this year's BOTI. And so we'll be inviting you to come to that. The BOTI has 3 main messages about the role of the trustee in supporting student success. And that is that effective boards set the strategic direction for the college. They create a culture for change when they see that change needs to happen. And then lastly, they monitor what matters. And when we say monitoring what matters, we're talking about the ways that trustees and your CEO discuss student outcomes in your meetings and what you do with that data. So monitoring what matters. So if you would please move the slide for me. I want to show you the Texas Pathways model to give context to the monitoring what matters or the data conversations we're going to have in a moment. So this is the model if you haven't seen it before. And it's the basic model that shows that we begin with the students' end goals in mind. So if you start on the right-hand side of this model, the outcome then beginning with the end in mind is that students want to earn good careers and they want to know what more education they can come back and get so that they can continue to promote within their occupations. And so then the colleges are backwards mapping. If I didn't say it before, all 50 community colleges in the state are participating in this, are volunteering to take this support and commit, their leadership has committed to implementing and scaling the essential practices of this model. And so what they're doing is they're looking at what are the good careers and the further education that their students need, and then they're backwards mapping and improving their systems and their processes and their practices in each of these 4 categories that students come to connect and enter and progress and succeed. And so there's detailed practices within each of those 4 boxes that your colleges are working on. And so when we think about what students were talking about with this, it's really a wide variety, as you know, students coming into the community colleges. Some are 8th graders who are selecting an endorsement and making sure that we have good connections with our high schools and the high school students, or new graduates as they onboard, but also expanding the way we think about the students we have. These are the ones we have, adults in our communities. And particularly with COVID and how it's affected our people in our community, strengthening our outreach to those who've been hit and have been unemployed, or maybe they're underemployed. Maybe they have some college, but no degree yet. And so stepping up our practices by knowing our community and outreaching to them and providing opportunity for short-term credentials, go back to work, come back and further their education. So that's our Texas Pathways model. And when we think about the data then that we look at, or what boards are looking at, then on the next slide, you'll see in the 4 boxes in the center, the key performance indicators that all of your colleges use when they come to the institutes and they do their action planning or how they're going to be implementing this model. They're looking at, first in the Connect box, the total enrolled for that semester. So having a good picture of the students that are coming to you and how prepared they are. How many of them are Pell and the likes. And then as they enter, we're also looking at who's completing 6 or more semester credit hours in the first term as an indicator of momentum. Completing college math and English in the first year is another early momentum measure. We're looking at whether students are completing 15 or 30 semester credit hours in the first year, and then all the semester credit hours that they attempted. And then lastly, are they succeeding? And 2 ways we look at the way they're succeeding is either they transfer when they intended to, and they do that with 15 or more hours, or if they're actually completing certificates and associate's degrees within 3 years. So those are some key performance indicators that many of your colleges are looking at. All of your colleges have this. The center partners with the coordinating board in order to provide these key performance indicators to your teams. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you one of those key performance indicators. I'm going back to the one about completing college level math in the first year. So as you know, this is a measure for those of you who've been looking at data for some time, and I know many of you have. You know that this is a measure that we have not had success with in the past. Are students completing college level math, and are they doing it quickly in the first year? And so what this measure shows is over time. So up at the top, the first row shows the years that this data was collected. So these are incoming first time in college students who started in the fall of 2013, 2014, 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. So looking a longitudinal look of all first time in college students and whether they completed a college level math course in their first year. Now, if you go all the way down to the bottom in the light green bar, the total, you see that we started out in 2013, only 25% of all first time in college students met that mark, completing college level math in the first year. And across time, if you looked even back further, because we've been looking at this indicator for some time, this was a data point that we were not moving the needle on. We were consistently in the same places and consistently low with different student populations. And so starting in 2013, we had 25%. And across time, we moved up all the way to now in 2019, we're at 37% of all first-time in college students who are completing college level math. And while that's not the number we were shooting for, ultimately we want that to be a much higher number. The fact that we're beginning to move the needle means that we're doing some things right. So the other way that we look at data is that we want to disaggregate that data by different student populations. So all the KPI data that your colleges have, and you guys are getting data from lots of places, right? I know you're looking at the almanac from the coordinating board. There's different reports. Your colleges have really increased the skills that they have and their capacity for collecting and analyzing and sharing data over time. We've definitely, as a state, we've gotten a lot better at that task. But these KPIs then are also disaggregated by these different student populations. So when you look down the left-hand column, you can see that we have disaggregated this data by underprepared and prepared, what race or ethnicity they are, male or female, whether they came to us with or without dual credit, whether they were full-time or part-time, and whether they received Pell or did not receive Pell. And so the way you read this then is that there's the set of underprepared and prepared is the 100% of the cohort that started in each of these years. And so the first line where it says 11%, then that means that 11% of first-time in college students who came to your college, this is a statewide picture, 11% of all first-time in college underprepared students in Texas completed a college level math course in their first year. That is a very low number. We know that if you started in Dev Ed, it's very difficult for you, especially back in 2013 when we hadn't implemented some of the innovations and co-requisite model. We were consistently very low in this category. If you just draw your eye from the left hand to the right hand side on the underprepared, you can see that as a state total, all 50 community colleges, we've moved the needle for underprepared students from 11% to 26%. Again, nothing to celebrate. That's not where we want to stop, but that is progress. That is progress. We're doing something right. We need to keep leaning into that space. So one other thing I want to draw your attention to on this slide, and I want to share another set of data. If you go down to African Americans, so we've always done poorly serving African American students, especially in this measure of completing college level math. So you can see they were the lowest if you look across the whites at 29, African Americans at 11, Hispanics at 24, and other at 32. They were behind the pack. And so if we talk about closing the gaps, then let your eye follow that 11% all the way down to 2019. And you can see that for African American first-time college students, they're now at 25% of them completing a college level math course. So this is a slide to celebrate that we are beginning to make progress on this measure. Now, the next measure I want to show you as an example of some data that you might be talking about at your colleges in your trustee meetings is this about persistence. So it's not just about completing a course, it's about persisting, being retained. And we're talking about some early momentum measures. So we're not talking about completion today, but certainly is also a measure you should be looking at. This one is a data point that I bring up because it's the opposite of the one before. So before I said this is a measure where we're beginning to see movement. So the one I'm showing you now, whether the first time in college students persist from the fall to the spring, is a measure that we collectively, the 50 of us, have not moved the needle on. If you go down to the light green bar at the bottom, the row at the bottom, you can see we're exactly where we were in 2013. 75% of all first-time in college students in the state have persisted from fall to spring. So this is an area that we continue to need to make improvement on. And if I were to go through each of these disaggregated sets of data, you would see that it holds true for everyone in every category. They're just stagnant across these several years. So I'm anxious in a moment to turn to our panel and hear them talk about the ways that they look at data, but I want to show you one more data point before I turn it to Martha and the panel, if you would please. So this is a new set of data for us as a statewide, looking at a collective set of data. When we went into the pandemic and the colleges moved to online, and we started a clear focus on those who were unemployed and underemployed and the skills that they needed to get back to work very quickly, then TAC and the center purchased this data from Burning Glass. So some colleges already had Burning Glass, and so some of you may have already seen this kind of labor market information. But we wanted to level the playing field so that all colleges had a set of labor market information that they were getting from TAC. And so this is the information that's being shared. Let me tell you what it is. So this is labor market research that uses job descriptions, key occupations, and skill sets for each of those occupations, and then begins to look at whether this should be targeted as a key occupation because it's a high demand occupation, lots of jobs are open, and they are jobs that could be quickly upskilled in 6 months or less. And then so that we can begin to be building out and promoting these programs very quickly for our communities. And so here's an example of one set of data that you may be looking at. This one is a statewide profile, and the key occupation is computer user support specialist. So a wide variety of businesses who could be hiring folks who are skilled and have credentials in computer user supports specialties. And so when we looked over a year span, we found that there were over 25,000 job postings for computer user support specialists. And when we looked at then the BLS, the BLS data for Texas, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we found that the median salary for computer user support specialists was over $47,000. So this is definitely a key occupation that we'd want to quickly upskill folks to get into. There's some other things we wanted to look at about these occupations before we started asking folks around the state to start targeting that. And that is this is a career that's going to continue to grow. If folks could get in entry level with short-term credentials, and whether most of them were going to eventually require a bachelor's degree, and whether there was a risk at automation causing these jobs to fade in the near future. So with this key occupation, there was a projected growth between 2020 and 2030 that we're going to have a 19% growth in these kinds of jobs. So this is a good one to target. It's going to continue to grow. This is also a good one because 52% of all those job descriptions were entry-level jobs. So this is also a good direction to point our students in. 45% of them required a bachelor's degree. So, over half did not. So eventually people who go into this track are going to likely come back for further education and complete bachelor's degrees. But they have a way to enter early. And then lastly, it's at a medium risk of being automated. So this data also pointed out what are the top 5 specialized skills. So colleges are really focusing in on what are the skill sets that we can teach folks in short-term credentials to get them back to work. And so this research has identified that for this key occupation, the top 5 specialized skills, technical support, customer service support, help desk support, repairs, printers, are the top skills for computer user support specialists. This research also identified the top 5 certifications that these kinds of positions require. You can see them there. And the top 5 employers in Texas who are hiring folks who have these credentials. And so if you have employers in your communities, these 5, these are the top employers. So if they are in your communities, this would be a good credential for you to promote and to make sure that people in your communities know how they can easily come and get their credential and get to work. Lastly, these occupations are important to the following industries. So lots of these around your communities: professional, scientific, technical services, financial, insurance, and manufacturing. Lots of jobs in Texas in computer user support specialists. So that's 3 kinds of data, the 2 key performance indicators and this labor market information, which are commonly in our conversations about implementing guided pathways in Texas, and what your teams are talking about in building out and scaling up this work. And I'm interested in hearing about how the trustees on this panel coming up are looking at data and using data. But I'll just end my section by saying these are the kinds of conversations that we would be having at our Board of Trustees Institute. We will be in September, is looking at the ways what kinds of data that colleges are looking at, and what ways that trustees are using that data then in their role of supporting the colleges, improving student success. So with that, I would like to turn it back over to Martha and the panel.
Thank you, Cynthia. As Cynthia said, we're going to move into a discussion now with our panelists to hear as they share about how they use student outcome data to guide in their discussion and decision making with the colleges. I'm going to ask a series of questions, but I encourage all of you to post questions in the chat as well, and we will include those in the questions to our panelists. So what I'd like to do first is introduce our panelists to you, and then we will take down the PowerPoint slides so that everyone can see our panelists as the discussion. So first of all, Dr. Richard Rhodes. Dr. Rhodes is the Chancellor of Austin Community College, and he is the chair-elect of the American Association of Community Colleges Board of Directors as well. Joining him from Austin Community College is Nicole Eversmann, and she is a trustee. She is actually the secretary of the Board of Trustees at ACC, and she's also a board member of CCATT. So welcome, Nicole. From Texarkana College, we have Jason Smith, who is the president and CEO of Texarkana College, and joining him from the college is the president of the Board of Trustees, Kaye Ellison, and the vice president of the Board of Trustees of Texarkana College, Derrick McGary. So thank you all panelists for joining us. And with that, thank you, Ellie, for taking down the slides. And I'm going to just move right into questions. The first question I'm going to ask is to our 2 CEOs. So what student outcomes or key performance indicators do you prepare for the board to review, and how is the decision made on which data points and at which meetings these are discussed? So Richard, let me start with you.
Great, thank you very much, Martha. And we're glad to be here. First of all, let me start and say, our trustees have approved a strategic plan, which really talks about everything that you just heard about from Cynthia. And that is, when we talk about our strategic plan, we have 4 different goals within our board adopted strategic plan, and that includes equity and access. And for each one of these, I will tell you that we have very specific metrics as to how we measure those. But the first one is equity and access. The second one is persistence and engagement. Third is completion and transfer. And then the fourth is efficiency and effectiveness. And what you'll see is these align very well with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board 60 by 30 and fits within that framework. And so at the end of every year, we give the board a student success report, but we also give them a chancellor's report that includes all of the metrics and all of the data for that. But that's not enough to have a once a year conversation. And so one of the things that we've done, and it's an iterative process that you keep changing and you keep adapting to make sure that your board gets the right information, that they can have the right type of conversations, that when it comes to budget time, can make the right allocations necessary to help in student success. So one of the things that we have done this year that's even different, we wanted to take even deeper dives into data and into information with our trustees. So we came up with 6 different, what we call chancellor's priorities that are very specific, with very specific metrics and goals and outcomes, measurements and milestones that we present. So during the months, at the beginning of the year, during the months of September and October, we had detailed conversations with our trustees on these 6 different Chancellor's priorities, getting into how are we going to measure success for this year. So this is a 1-year strategy to make significant progress in the 4 goals of the strategic plan. So, September and October, we get into a deep dive discussion on what are those metrics and what are those milestones and measures. And then periodically in each board meeting, then we will give an update. How are we progressing in one of those areas? And so each month, starting in January, we've identified one of those priorities, Chancellor's priorities, and we'll go deeper into the dive on that. And so let me give you the 6 different Chancellor's priorities for this year that are going to make a difference, that we've had some courageous conversations with our board on how we're going to improve student outcomes and student success. The first one, we put it number 1 intentionally, and that is to reduce equity gaps across the board. The second is we also recognize that if we don't give our employees the right tools, that we can't expect them to be successful in student success. So number 2 is modernize ACC's technology resources. The third is provide an exceptional online education. And we put that specifically up there because, we had to move 100% of our courses back a year ago to online. And one of the metrics that we've always used is how do our students perform in face-to-face classes as opposed to online classes, as opposed to hybrid. And so using the data where, we had some disparity gaps between student success of completion of courses delivered online versus face-to-face. So how do we make a difference there? And so we had a very focused conversation on exceptional online education and some steps we had to take to make sure that we were increasing the success of students. Fourth was help Central Texans get back to work. And that's where we get into those short-term paths. So how do we get within 6 months or less, how do we give the right skill sets necessary for members in our community who have become unemployed or underemployed to get back into the workforce and earn a living wage? And so we were very specific on how we were going to do that and discuss that with our Board of Trustees and got the right feedback. The fifth one is increase course success rates. We can't expect that students are going to be successful on persistence from semester to semester or from fall to fall if they're not completing the courses that they register for, that they're enrolled in. So we got very specific about taking a look at such things as what are the top 10 enrolled courses and where are the weaknesses in where do we lose the students? And so how do we focus on that? And the sixth is for this year specifically is how do we foster a safe physical and cultural environment for our students, our faculty, and our staff. And like I say, we've got very specific measurements and we have deep dive conversations in our board meetings about each of those. And I know Nicole is going to talk about actually one that we just had this past Monday night at our Board of Trustee meeting. So
thank you,
I'll
Richard.
stop there.
Terrific, thank you. Jason, let me turn over to you to talk about Texarkana and the indicators that you prepare.
So one of the things, and I think a lot of the things that we do at TC are what we're doing across the state at other community colleges. I won't go into the detail as Richard did such a wonderful job about the process of utilizing the strategic planning process, but I will talk about examples of how that strategic plan and how it is developed with our trustees and how it impacts the culture of us here that work day to day at the college. So first of all, it comes down to having great communication that builds trust and transparency. And we do that through the way we communicate. We send out a weekly update to our trustees. In that communication, It is embedded with student data. All of the different indicators that were mentioned earlier, where we're talking about different student demographics, we're talking about enrollment, retention, persistence, completion. That is sent out periodically on a weekly basis to our trustees. That same exact information that I send out to the trustees each week goes out to all of our leadership here at the college. Of course, many of the leadership is helping me accumulate that information, but I think it's very important for all the leadership to see that same data so that we're all on the same page. So immediately there's transparency, everyone understand where we are as a college. We are also able to see where we have some success, but it also allows us to see where we're not being successful. And I'll give you an example of how that impacts us as a college, but more importantly for our trustees and how they're able to utilize that information. One example was this past year, as the information is getting out, and again, trustees are seeing this, the leadership throughout our college is seeing this, is we had our African-American male student population was not being as successful as our other demographics. And it just stood out. When you look at the data and you look at it in different ways, it's something that it just stood out. So it just, we knew this was going to be something that was going to be important to our board, and it was something that was important to our board. It became part of our strategic plan this year. So we went through that process of how do we go about identifying our African-American males? How do we make sure we provide that support? Through those discussions with our trustees, with our leadership team, we've developed a process of having a coaching model that is new to us. We have all of our faculty do advising, but for whatever reason, that has not been successful for that particular demographic group. And so we wanted to be a little bit more specific. We do think that this is going to be something that's going to be very successful and could expand to other target groups that we identified through the data that we share with our trustees and our leadership group, but it is something that we've implemented. Another example would be our non-traditional students. We do a great job of developing ways to market, identify those students, get them here. But that was something that our board has identified as this is a group that we're really not reaching out to, and we've just been very fortunate that they would come to TC, get a workforce certificate, or get to expand their education, and they would come to us first. So that's been something that we reached out. How that's impacted us here as those who are working the day-to-day is the strategic plan process. We were a little late getting started because of COVID, but we completed that process in September. From September to now, we've been able to develop commercials, 15-second, 30-second commercials, targeting those students. We've identified a new scholarship program in partnership with our Texarkana College Foundation. They've raised over $250,000 just targeting those students. We've also identified different ways that we can reach out to them through social media. Also, we're utilizing different technologies that we can capture their social media information and be able to target some of our marketing to those students, and also be able to give them the additional support that's needed through the admission process. So that has been a transformational thing that's been able to be accomplished. Again, going through the strategic planning process, giving everyone that access to data on a weekly, monthly basis through board presentations, and then through the QEP data that's shared with our board as well. Having everyone know what information's out there. We all see the same information. It's not anything that's hidden, or it really allows us to see what we're being very successful at, so we can celebrate, and we do that as well. We celebrate our successes when we're successful, and then it also allows us to see where we're not being successful, and we know that's an area of target.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I want to turn now to our trustees, and built on what our CEOs just told us, about the discussions that you are having and the courageous conversations that are making a difference in the decision making. So Nicole and Kaye, let me ask you. So Nicole, I'll start with you. So could you describe a little bit about how the data discussions are held, and are they held at board workshops, retreats, regular board meetings, all of the above? How has it happened? And what's the process that you use so that you can have those types of discussions and courageous conversations? So Nicole?
Thank you. It's all of the above. We meet the first Monday of every month and typically have an additional working session each quarter, and board retreats in the summer, but we had an extra one in January this year. So our board is very focused on outcomes data, and like Dr. Rhodes was discussing earlier, we have a long-term vision for the strategic plan that crosses multiple years, and the Chancellor priorities with very clearly defined metrics, the baseline, target, and progress are for the specific fiscal year that we're going through. And that has been really valuable to get those reports as we're going throughout the year, instead of like a fire hose of information all at the retreat, and being able to discuss different pieces of our goals each month has allowed us to understand things more in depth, which I've really been appreciative of. And as we were talking, I remembered our 2019 board retreat, which was the last one we did in person. We split the board up into teams. And so it was like a pair of trustees along with a pair of administrators. And each of the pairs looked at one of our 4 strategic priorities. And we discussed how we're measuring each of these, what reports we're including, what might we have left out, and really took that opportunity for each board member to understand what's in the strategic plan and how we're measuring each of those goals.
Terrific, thank you. Kaye, let me turn it to you to ask about Texarkana College.
Yes, thank you very much. I came on board in 2012, and at that point, Texarkana College had a few issues going on with finances, from that to completion to everything. James Henry Russell was the president at that time. He was new also, and the things that I know are now what we use and are so valuable. And evidently, that's not what was happening before I got here. So I've been on since 2012, and that's how things have been running very smoothly. We have, at the end of each week, we get a report from the president and from the leadership team, and we are updated, as Dr. Smith was saying, on every bit of data we might need to know. Sometimes it's more than we even knew we needed to know. We can take that, we can ask questions, we can pass that on, or we can get some community support from that. And then when we have our monthly board meetings, we get that information 4 or 5 days ahead. We get an agenda with a brief description of each agenda item. Once again, very free to ask questions, make sure we're clear about this. And then when these different items are presented, we have ample opportunity to ask questions, make sure that we are solid in our understanding before we make votes on these. Then, of course, we have an annual board retreat, just like everyone's talking about, where we set all of our priorities, make our strategic plan. We have turned this into using our leadership team with, once again, with the Board of Trustees, and doing our identification with a consensus of, we may have 10 items we want to achieve, but we really can only focus on 5 or 6 at a time. So we prioritize it, and it's been very effective. And like I said, the only way I've known it, but evidently it's a great way, because we've seen great strides in our completion rates, etc.
Terrific, thank you. Thanks very much, and congratulations on that as well, on that work. Let me stick with the board members now, and Derrick, I want to start with you this time to talk about how does the TC board use student outcome data to actually inform decision making?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been on the board since 2017, and since my tenure on the board, there really has not been any student outcome data that we use to really drive any major policy changes. But when we're talking about maybe procedures that the Board of Trustees, along with the leadership, uses this data for student outcomes, there have been some minor tweakings in some procedures here at the college. Maybe for an example, looking at the numbers in terms of enrollment, maybe we added a recruiter, or in terms of looking at student success, what did we do? Did we need to add or replace faculty, or choose not to add or replace faculty members in certain departments? So looking at the data, being able to manage to the data, and if necessary, make some changes in policy to make sure that we're getting the best result for student outcomes, not only for student success, but as you know, our responsibility as trustees is that we are representatives of the public. So not only do we need to make sure that we are achieving the utmost goal, which is student success, but listening to the community and listening to what their needs are as well.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you, Derrick. Nicole, let me shift to you and ask about how the ACC board uses student outcomes data to inform your decision making.
Yeah, very similar to what was said. A lot of that, I think, is for administrative level decisions, but it's important that the board see this outcome data to make sure that we're fulfilling our role of having the institution accountable to our tax base. And one thing that we've been focusing on a lot is regional economic data. As Cynthia was talking about earlier, we want to begin with the end in mind and understand, are we marketing programs that will give students a job with meaningful wages? Are we improving their lives by educating them here at our college? And so we think about these questions, really, what's the value add to our programs? And also important questions around equity and inclusion. We like to see disaggregated data based on race and ethnicity. And we also, as such a large district around the Central Texas area, we incorporate a lot more than just Austin. We are often, board members are asking about zip codes where students are coming from. Are students having to travel from one end of the district to get access to a very unique program? What does that mean for accessibility? And additionally, for things like our CARES funding and the Student Emergency Fund, who in our community is really suffering and needing to access these services? And that can inform things like where we provide food bank resources and those considerations. Additionally, it's really important to consider unique student groups like our veterans and our dual credit students, and ask questions, remembering that not every student is a full-time first in college person. Like, we have a lot of part-time students, we have a lot of older adults, we have some post-baccalaureate programs. And so we have to make sure that as our policies are made, we're understanding the vast options of demographics of the people that we're serving.
Right, I'm going to stick with this. So pardon me a little bit on some shifting around here, but I want to stick with this topic that both Nicole and Derrick have brought up. And that is when you look at the disaggregated data. So you both have talked about this. So when you look at that disaggregated data, whether you disaggregate by race and ethnicity or Pell status or program status, as you were talking about, Nicole, or zip codes, however you look at it, and you see gaps in opportunity or gaps in achievement, what do you do? So Derrick, let me start with you. You mentioned this. So what do you do when you see those gaps as a board?
So just to kind of talk a little bit more about what Nicole hit on about the disaggregated data around race and ethnicity. You heard Dr. Smith mention in his presentation where he talked about the numbers of the African-American male are not where we want them to be. And those numbers, when you look at all of the data that the leadership provides to us every week and you see these trends, you're like, hey, what is it that we can do to make our success rate among African-American males where it needs to be, or at least start trending towards some improvement in that area. And all of those things are talked about in terms of planning and discussion within our strategic plan. You also heard Dr. Smith also talk about some other part of that disaggregated data is our, as we prefer to call them, non-traditional students. Nicole mentioned that everybody's not going to be 18 years old and this is their first time in college. Some people are giving it a second try. Some people are 45, 50 plus years old and have never sat in a college class. What can we do to make those students successful? Because their success is just as important as anyone else. And so, and just to repeat what Dr. Smith said, we have a scholarship program now that is set up exclusively to make sure that those students are successful. So it's all at looking at what our community is made up, looking at that data, looking at those demographics, and looking to see where our shortcomings might be. And so we can help make sure that everyone in our community has a chance at a quality education right here in Texarkana.
Thank you so much, Derrick. I really appreciate when you said looking at the colleges or our very own shortcomings of looking at what can you do to better serve students that you see them as asset-based, and what can you do to better serve them and serve your community. So appreciate that comment. Nicole, let me turn to you to ask again that same question.
Thank you. I'll just add two things. The first is related to hiring of faculty and staff. So we, or not ACC we, but in the research community where there are multiple threads about how diverse faculty and employees at a college impact diverse student populations and their ability to feel like they belong in that institution. And so the board has received reports about how our faculty and staff hiring processes have changed to prioritize equity and diversity in hiring. And so that has been really valuable, and we hope to continue to see gains made in that arena. But the other point I want to mention is that our diversity should reflect the community. And so we look at the data of people who are living in Central Texas, and we say, how does this look compared to our student population? And how does the Central Texas demographics look based on education? So if we have a lot of one minority group, but they're already highly educated, are we harsh about not having high enrollment in that group? Absolutely not. So thinking about all of these factors, the intersectionality of these different identities is really important.
Great, thank you so much. We've talked a lot about quantitative data. I want to shift gears a little bit and ask board members about qualitative data, really understanding what's behind the numbers. So how do you utilize qualitative data from focus groups or town halls or other ways that you collect it to further understand the student success issues and inform your strategic direction? So Nicole, let me start with you this time.
Am I allowed to pass this to Dr. Rhodes? Because I have not gotten to attend. So I know that since COVID, we've had multiple virtual town halls. And maybe you can speak to that a little bit since I haven't been able to attend.
Sure. Is that okay, Martha? Oh.
She's frozen, but yes, it's okay.
Okay. So, a couple of things. One is one of our past trustee chairs said, one of the things that the board needs to hear is they need to hear directly from students. And so one of the things that we incorporated was a student presentation to our board at a board meeting. And usually that's a scholarship recipient that can talk about the difference that scholarship made, but the difference that the faculty made, or an advisor, or so forth, in their persistence and in their success. So that's one thing. Another one is that, our current board chair and and Nicole, and decided to take a look at what about our community partners. So we've had presentation at the beginning of each meeting. Now we have a presentation by one of our strategic community partners, like the Greater Austin Chamber of Commerce, the Asian, last month it was the Asian Chamber of Commerce, the Army Futures Command, General Mike Murray, Capital Idea, one of our supporters with our nursing program. So they bring comments and have a quick discussion with our board at the very beginning. But like Nicole was saying, we've had a number of virtual forums to talk about different issues that confront our faculty, staff, and our students, such as return to campus conversation. What does that mean? What does it mean working from home when you have kids and you've got other things that you have to take care of at home, and how does that affect you as students and as faculty and staff? So we try to do that. Prior to COVID, we had campus forums. So we would go out to the, Nicole said we've got 11 campuses. So we would go out to different campuses and have those conversations open to faculty, staff, and students, with board members there to hear the questions, the comments, any concerns that they have, any suggestions that they would have. Of course, when we went into COVID, we weren't on the campuses. So that's why we converted to the virtual forums. And those have been very, very successful. And the board members participate and listen in on those.
Great, thanks. Kaye?
I can say ditto to several things coming from other speakers, but one thing I'd like to bring up for us is we have a huge workforce section in Texarkana and within the college, and we provide a lot of training for a lot of our industrial, so to speak, community partners. And especially during COVID, I've heard from numerous people that they really have valued some of this hands-on. They were able to do some workforce training as a stepping stone because they are doing higher ed in another field, but they felt like maybe I can just do this workforce so that I can have a job attainment here and provide for my family, but working towards something else. It's been interesting to see that development. And so some of that came from the community, from the different industries around Texarkana, what they need and what we've been able to provide through some of our grants through the workforce has been really amazing. And so we've been able to actually provide the training that some of these industries need. So I just wanted to throw that in as another community aspect.
That's terrific. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Just have a few minutes left. So I have two questions left. One, I want to ask to the two CEOs, just a really quick question for you. And we know that Texas community colleges receive some funding based on student performance through student success points. So how has this funding model impacted your review of student success data? So Richard, we'll start with you, and then Jason, if you could follow up.
Sure. Thanks, Martha. The history of the student success points, it was kind of copied after the state of Washington and their momentum points. And when Cynthia was talking about momentum of students, what did they need when they first came to the college? Was it developmental math, developmental writing? How were they going to be successful in their first college level math course or college level, intensive writing course? Did they accumulate 15 hours, 30 hours? Did they transfer? Did they complete a certificate and so forth? So one of the good things about this is that, when you take a look at momentum points, it forces you to look at specific data in segments of a student's progression. As opposed to waiting and just, prior to that, I would have to say that, oftentimes we were guilty of just looking at two points of data. One was how many students could we get into by the 12th class day, because that's what we were paid on at the time. And the last one was, how many did we get out the door through graduation? And that's pretty much it. What this really does is allow us to look at that whole progression, and not only to measure ourselves and the improvement in ourselves in each one of those metrics, but it allows us to look at comparisons to our peer colleges and look at promising practices, and then to have those discussions in the, what Cynthia puts together in the Texas Success Center and the convenings. And we can talk about those specifically. And one of them that Cynthia brought up was the success of the first college level math class, and taking a look at that. So by looking at that specific metric, then it allowed us to say, we can't continue to deliver math the same way we've always delivered it. Our math faculty really took off with that. And one of the things, the outcomes has been the accelerator. And so in kind of a competency-based delivery of mathematics with the wraparound support services necessary for a student to be successful. And we saw some good success in that and eliminating disparity gaps. But we took it, we found from some of our other peers that co-requisite is really working well. And we learned from that and adopted that too through our math faculty. And so the good thing is we learn by looking at, deeper dive into the data for ourselves, but then looking at promising practices of our peers.
Thanks. Jason, anything you'd like to add to that?
Just a little bit. One of the things that Success Points has been something that we really have enjoyed at Texarkana College. It has allowed us to generate additional revenues that we otherwise wouldn't have had. So it's been good for us. But I will tell you this, it is a topic of discussion with our leadership team all the time, is how much do we push it out to our faculty and have those conversations around success points. And the only discussion that we continue to have, and let me just back up and just say where we can, and we will share success points with our trustees and how we generate revenue and how much we generate revenue. But I will tell you, as a practice, the focal point of success points, how it's generated, how successful we are, is probably, that conversation only happens between me, the CFO, our chief academic officer, and our IR person, to be honest with you. That's just to be honest. And we have 4,000 students. Here's our logic right now. And I'm not saying that this won't change because if the data starts telling us something different, we will shift. We will pivot if we need to. But we have developed such a successful culture, a culture of success, or a culture of completion, that if we ever saw that in some of these areas where perhaps, well, it's created, everyone's on the same plane, the same plane. If we want all students to rise, and and everyone sees where you are as a program or as a, and we've been fortunate up to this point where all program success and completion all have increased steadily, very similar. Now, if we start seeing some perform less than others, we've been able to tackle those on an independent case. If we do see some of our success points drop because maybe we're not being as targeted as we need to in those areas, I think that would, I think that's something that would happen. But again, we're a college of 4,000 students. It's not, our faculty is a few hundred, not thousands. So the change is not, it's not a whole lot to pivot because we are that, of that size. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's really the logic we're using as of today. I say that today, Martha, but that may change tomorrow based on the data that we get.
Thanks. I really appreciate what both Richard and you said as we wrap up, is that it depends on the data. And what the data says is going to guide the trustees in moving forward in the decisions you make. So let me say thank you so much to all of our panelists. I really appreciate your willingness to share the inner workings of how it works at your colleges and give us some insights on the decisions that you're making. Thank you for your wonderful contribution to the students that you serve. And let me turn it back to Cynthia.
So I just want to echo what Martha said. Thanks to this panel. Thank you for being honest about things that are sometimes hard to talk about. And I thank those who are participating, because I think that if we had opened up the mics and asked you, you would have also had great stories of the ways that you're also monitoring what matters and how you've made good progress. So I want to thank you for your dedication to that as well. So one last slide, if you wouldn't mind, Ellie, flashing up. I just want to remind you of some dates that Manny mentioned at the top of the hour, and that is that we're going to continue this webinar series. In June, there will be a legislative update, quite timely. And then in August, as we're just about to enter into our September BOTI and CATT annual conference, we'll have one last webinar in this series. And in that, we are going to be speaking with folks from the Aspen Institute. I don't know if they've agreed to do that yet, but we're inviting them to come talk about the Aspen Prize. And the reason we want to do that is because we're going to be spotlighting the Aspen Prize winners and finalists. So you know that 4 out of 10 of them are from right here in Texas. And so that speaks very well of the good work that's going on in Texas. And we want to make sure that trustees who go into the September event have a good appreciation of what it means to be an Aspen Prize finalist. And so then put this date in your calendar, September 16 through 18. This will be the first time that we get back together face to face. It will be so good to see each other and to shake hands and to talk with one another face to face. And so we're going to have that opportunity September 16 through 18. So I just want to thank you so very much for the work that you do. I know that you're volunteers who have great passion for what you're doing. So trustees, thank you, thank you, thank you for helping us improve our institutions and better serve those people in our communities. And with that, I will say goodbye, have a great afternoon, and we will see you at the next webinar.